The Dark Awakening. The night was quiet. The stars twinkled faintly in the vast sky, and the world below seemed peaceful. But beneath the surface of the earth, something was stirring, a force long forgotten, waiting to be awakened. Deep underground, far from human eyes, a strange energy began to pulse. At first it was small, barely noticeable. But soon it grew stronger, more intense, sending ripples through the planet. The scientists at the Global Earth Observatory were the first to notice. The computers beeped and flashed with warnings. Dr. Elena Mercer, a lead scientist, studied the readings carefully. "What is this?" she whispered to herself. The readings were unlike anything they had ever seen before. The source of the energy seemed to be coming from deep within the Earth's crust, too deep to be a natural event, too powerful to be ignored. "Professor Mercer, you need to see this," one of her colleagues, Dr. Samuel Grant, called from across the room. Elena hurried over to his station. The screen displayed a map of the Earth with a bright red blinking dot in the center of the Pacific Ocean. "It's spreading," she said, her voice filled with concern. "This energy is getting stronger, and it's heading straight for the surface." The room fell silent as the weight of the discovery sank in. There were no known records of anything like this. It was as if a door had been opened to something ancient, something terrifying. Elena could feel it in the air, a strange, heavy feeling, as if the Earth itself was holding its breath. "Should we notify the government?" Dr. Grant asked, his face pale. Elena nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. She picked up the phone and dialed the number for the president's office. The call was urgent. The world needed to know what was happening beneath their feet. Elsewhere, across the globe, the world's military forces were on high alert. Strange disturbances had been reported in remote parts of the world. In the mountains of South America, large cracks appeared in the earth. In the deserts of Africa, strange lights flickered in the sky. The atmosphere was thick with unease. At a military base in the United States, General Hawkins paced nervously as he read the reports. Something was coming, and it was coming fast. "We need to prepare," he said to his team. "I don't know what this is, but we need to be ready." Back at the Earth Observatory, Elena continued to study the data. She couldn't understand it, but she knew one thing for certain. Whatever was happening, it was no accident. The pulse was growing stronger by the minute, and soon the surface of the Earth would be affected. She had to warn the world. But before she could make another call, the ground shook violently. Elena stumbled as the floor beneath her feet trembled. The building's lights flickered and went out. Panic spread through the observatory as alarms began to blare. "What the hell is going on?" Dr. Grant shouted. A deep, low rumble filled the air, coming from the Earth itself. It was unlike anything anyone had ever heard. It sounded like the roar of something massive, something alive. Then the shaking stopped. For a brief moment, there was silence. But that silence was broken by a sound that sent chills down everyone's spine. A sound like grinding metal, loud and horrifying. From beneath the ground, something began to rise. The first signs of the metallic creatures were barely visible, but they were there. Large, dark shapes began to move beneath the earth, their massive forms shifting as they began to break through the crust. At first it was just a crack in the surface, a small opening that grew wider and wider. Elena and Dr. Grant rushed to the windows, their eyes wide in disbelief. They watched in horror as the ground itself split open. From the cracks emerged enormous metallic creatures, their bodies gleaming with an eerie, unnatural shine. Their eyes glowed like fiery embers, burning with hunger and rage. They're not human," Dr. Grant whispered, his voice shaking. "What are they?" The creatures slowly emerged from the ground, their massive metallic bodies towering over the observatory. They were like nothing anyone had ever seen before, alien in every sense of the word. Some had long, spindly limbs, while others were bulky and brutish, with jagged, sharp edges all over their bodies. They were terrifying, unstoppable forces of nature. But it wasn't just their appearance that struck fear into the hearts of those who saw them. It was their movement. They moved with purpose, with intelligence. It was clear that they were not simply mindless creatures. They were something much more. And they were hungry. Alina's heart raced as she realized the terrible truth. These creatures had not just risen from the earth. They had been waiting for something or someone to release them. And now, that time had come. As the creatures moved toward the city, Alina and Dr. Grant watched helplessly. There was no way to stop them. The city was unprepared. The military was unprepared. The world was unprepared. But as the first screams echoed through the city, Alina knew that this was only the beginning. The Earth's dark secret had been unleashed, and there was no turning back. The beasts from the dark void were here, and they were ready to destroy everything in their path. The unstoppable force. The roar of destruction echoed through the air, sending shockwaves of panic across the city. Buildings trembled as the massive creatures from the dark void continued their terrifying march forward. Alina Mercer and Dr. Grant stood frozen in place, their eyes wide with disbelief as they watched the unimaginable unfold before them. The metallic beasts were relentless. Their enormous, jagged limbs crashed against the ground with each step, creating deep cracks in the earth beneath them. The ground shook violently, throwing people off their feet as the creatures drew closer. It was like a nightmare made real, an unstoppable force of nature moving with terrifying purpose. "Get to the emergency shelters," Alina shouted, snapping out of her shock. She grabbed Dr. Grant's arm and pulled him toward the door. "We have to warn everyone." But the sound of their footsteps was drowned out by the earth-shattering noise of the creatures tearing through the city. The air was thick with dust and debris as people screamed in terror, running for their lives. Outside, chaos reigned. The streets were filled with panicked citizens, many of them too stunned to even move. The once bustling city had descended into a scene of utter destruction as the creatures tore through everything in their path. Cars were flipped over, buildings collapsed, and the sky was filled with a thick, smoky haze. The military had been called into action, but it was clear that no one was prepared for the sheer power of these beings. Tanks and fighter jets were deployed, but the creatures simply swatted them away like they were toys. No weapons seemed to have any effect on them. The metallic beasts were invincible. In the chaos, Alina and Dr. Grant found themselves caught in the middle of the madness. The streets were a war zone. Soldiers fired their weapons, but nothing seemed to stop the creatures. Alina could see the fear in their eyes, their faces pale as they realized how hopeless the situation had become. "Where are the military reinforcements?" Dr. Grant shouted over the roar of destruction. "They should be here by now." Alina shook her head. "They're not going to make it in time." The creatures had already taken control of the city, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop them. They were unstoppable, like a force of nature that couldn't be reasoned with. The world's military might, for all its power, was no match for these monstrous beings. Alina's thoughts raced. She had to find a way to stop them, to understand what they wanted. But there was no time for that now. Her first priority was survival. "We need to get to the president," she said, grabbing Dr. Grant's arm and pulling him toward a nearby emergency vehicle. "We need to warn him. If we don't act fast, the entire world is going to fall." Dr. Grant nodded, his face grim. He knew she was right. The creatures were more than just an attack. They were a sign of something far worse to come. Alina's mind raced. Who were these creatures? Where had they come from? And why had they chosen now to strike? But before she could dwell on these questions, a loud explosion shook the ground beneath them. A massive creature, its body gleaming with a strange metallic sheen, swung its massive arm through a building, sending debris flying in all directions. The shockwave sent Alina and Dr. Grant flying backward, their bodies crashing to the ground. Groaning in pain, Alina pushed herself up. She could see the devastation all around her, smoke rising from destroyed buildings, fire spreading across the streets, and the sounds of screaming and shouting filling the air. "They're everywhere," Dr. Grant muttered in disbelief, his eyes wide with fear. "What do we do now?" Elena didn't have an answer. The creatures were everywhere, and they showed no signs of stopping. The city was lost. The world was on the brink of collapse. But just as she began to lose hope, she saw a flash of movement out of the corner of her eye. It was a group of soldiers, running toward them with urgency. At first, Elena thought they were retreating, but then she saw the determination in their eyes. "They're not running," she whispered. "They're fighting back." The soldiers were armed with experimental weapons, devices designed to work against unknown threats. But even as they fired, Elena could see that the creatures barely flinched. The weapons seemed to have little effect, leaving nothing but a small scorch mark on the metallic hide of the beasts. It was clear that the situation was dire. The world was facing something far beyond anything they had ever encountered before. And as the creatures continued their rampage, Elena realized with a sinking heart that this was only the beginning. The metallic beasts from the dark void were here. And they weren't just interested in destruction. They were hunting for something. Elena didn't know what it was yet, but she had a feeling that the world would soon find out. With every passing minute, the creatures grew closer to their ultimate goal, and it was only a matter of time before humanity would have to face the truth of what had been unleashed. The search for answers. The city was in ruins. Buildings that once stood tall as symbols of human achievement now lay in smoldering heaps of rubble. The metallic beasts, relentless and insatiable, continued their devastating march through the urban landscape. Elena Mercer and Dr. Grant had managed to escape the immediate destruction, but the world around them had already begun to crumble. "Where do we go now?" Dr. Grant's voice was filled with desperation, his eyes darting nervously as the ground continued to tremble from the creature's movements. "We need to figure out what these things are and why they're here." Elena's mind raced. Every moment they wasted was another opportunity for the creatures to spread their terror further. Yet there was so little they knew. The creatures had come from a place beyond the stars, a dark void that even the most advanced telescopes couldn't reach. No one had predicted their arrival. No one had prepared for something so catastrophic. "We need to find answers," Elena said firmly, shaking off the overwhelming fear that was threatening to take hold of her. "If we understand why they're here, maybe we can stop them." The pair moved swiftly through the devastated streets, keeping to alleyways and side roads to avoid the open spaces where the creatures continued their rampage. Every now and then, they would hear the deafening roars of the metallic beasts in the distance, sending a wave of panic through their bodies. "Are we going to the military base?" Dr. Grant asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "No," Elena replied, shaking her head. "The military is overwhelmed. There's nothing they can do. We need to find a different way to stop this, something that hasn't been considered yet." They passed the remains of what was once a thriving downtown area, now just a memory. Fires burned out of control, and the acrid smell of smoke and ash filled the air. The streets were littered with debris, and the sounds of distant explosions punctuated the otherwise eerie silence. Elena's eyes scanned the horizon. In the distance, the faint outline of the presidential building could be seen, standing as a symbol of hope in the middle of the chaos. She knew they had to get there, but the journey would not be easy. "We need to warn them. We need to tell them that this is just the beginning," she said, her tone grim. The two of them hurried through the streets, knowing that every second counted. As they approached the government district, the sound of military helicopters overhead gave them a brief sense of hope, but it quickly faded as they saw the devastation the creatures had already caused. Helicopters were being shot out of the sky, falling in flames to the ground. Tanks and armored vehicles that had been deployed were scattered and destroyed, nothing more than twisted wreckage. The creatures were everywhere, tearing through the landscape like unstoppable forces of nature. The military's finest weapons were powerless against them, and Elena knew they needed a new plan, something that no one had thought of. "We're going to have to figure this out ourselves," Elena said, her voice cold with determination. "We need to learn what these creatures want. If we can figure that out, maybe we can stop them." But the task seemed impossible. Elena and Dr. Grant had no idea where to start. How could they possibly know what the creatures were after? The dark void they had emerged from was a mystery, and it seemed like all of humanity's knowledge couldn't explain their arrival. As they continued on, they found themselves at the edge of the city, where the damage was less severe. The creatures hadn't yet reached this part, but it was clear they wouldn't stop until everything was destroyed. Elena stopped for a moment, gazing out at the horizon, where the last of the city's defenses were crumbling. A sudden thought struck her. What if the creatures were after something specific? Something that humanity had unknowingly kept hidden all this time. "Dr. Grant, I think I know where we need to go," Elena said, her voice suddenly filled with urgency. "We need to go to the underground facility. It's the only place we haven't checked, and it could hold the key to understanding what these creatures are really after." Dr. Grant's eyes widened with realization. "The old research facility. You think they're looking for something down there?" "I'm not sure," Elena replied. "But it's the only place we haven't searched. It's a long shot, but it's all we have." With no time to waste, they made their way toward the facility. The air was thick with dust, and the streets were eerily quiet as they navigated through the wreckage. The creatures hadn't yet reached this far, but Elena knew that it was only a matter of time before they did. As they neared the entrance to the underground facility, Elena's heart pounded in her chest. What would they find inside? Could they uncover the secret to stopping the creatures? Or would they be too late to save humanity? With no other choice, they entered the dark, cold building, the sounds of destruction still echoing in the distance. Inside, the facility was abandoned, but something about the place felt wrong. It was as though they had walked into a place where something ancient and dangerous had been hidden away for far too long. "Let's move," Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. "We don't have much time." They descended deeper into the facility, unaware of the shocking secrets that awaited them. As the darkness closed in around them, the suspense grew, and the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on their shoulders. What would they find in this hidden underground labyrinth? And would it be enough to stop the dark, metallic beasts that threatened to destroy everything they knew? Secrets beneath the surface. Elena and Dr. Grant's footsteps echoed through the cold, sterile hallways of the underground facility. The walls, once gleaming white, were now stained with time and neglect. They moved cautiously, aware that the silence around them was both unsettling and dangerous. They had no idea what they might find, but the weight of their mission pressed heavily on them. "Why wasn't this place ever used?" Dr. Grant asked in a low voice, his curiosity getting the better of him as he looked around. The underground facility seemed like a forgotten relic, tucked away beneath layers of secrecy. This should have been one of the first places checked. Elena didn't respond immediately. She was too focused on finding the answers they needed. The creatures had emerged from the void, a terrifying force of destruction, unlike anything humanity had ever faced. If there was even a chance that the facility could hold the key to stopping them, they had to explore it. "Let's just stay focused," Elena replied, her voice firm. "We can figure out the details later. We need to find the control room." They moved deeper into the facility, passing through corridors that grew colder with each step. Every now and then, they would hear strange mechanical noises, like whispers from the past, but nothing in sight seemed out of place. Yet Elena felt something was wrong. The air was thick, heavy with a sense of impending danger, as if the very walls of the facility were holding their breath. As they entered the main section of the facility, Elena's eyes scanned the area. The hallways here were lined with heavy steel doors, many of which had been sealed shut long ago. On the walls, faded signs warned of danger, their messages now almost indecipherable. But one door stood out. It was slightly ajar, the faint light from within spilling into the hallway. Without a word, Elena moved toward it, and Dr. Grant followed closely behind. Inside, The room was vast, filled with old computers, dusty monitors, and a large central console. The hum of old machinery echoed through the space, and for a moment, Alina felt as though they had stepped into a time long past. This place had been abandoned, yet it seemed to hold answers. "This is it," Alina said, her heart racing. "We need to find out what happened here." Dr. Grant moved toward one of the computers, pulling up a dusty chair and sitting down. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he brought the terminal to life. For a few moments, the screen flickered, and then a string of encrypted data began to appear. "What are you seeing?" Alina asked, her voice tense. "It's all encrypted," Dr. Grant muttered. "But this looks like the logs of a research project, something that was hidden from the public." Alina stepped closer, peering over his shoulder as he worked. Slowly, he started to decrypt the data, revealing a message that sent a chill down both of their spines. "The Titans of the Void," Dr. Grant read aloud, his voice trembling. "We discovered them long before the first sightings. They were a part of an ancient experiment, an effort to unlock the power of the void itself." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Alina felt her stomach twist. The experiment had begun before the creatures had even shown up. This wasn't just an invasion. It was a part of something far bigger, far older than they had ever realized. "They're not just creatures," Alina whispered, the realization dawning on her. "They're the result of a failed experiment. They were made, and now they're out of control." Dr. Grant nodded, clearly disturbed. "If they were created, then there's a chance they were never supposed to be released. Whoever was in charge here, they may have unleashed something they couldn't contain." Alina's mind raced. "This is bigger than we thought. These creatures, these titans, they're not just invaders. They're a consequence of something humans did. And now the galaxy is paying the price." The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. The revelation sent shockwaves through Alina. The creatures were not alien in the traditional sense. They were born from humanity's own ambition and hubris. The Titans of the Void had once been contained, kept hidden away in the depths of space, but now they were here, and they were angry. "Alina, look at this," Dr. Grant said, pointing to another part of the decrypted log. "There's a map, a plan to contain the creatures, to destroy them before they could ever escape." Alina leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the information. The plan involved a device, something called the Void Reactor. It was supposed to neutralize the energy that powered the creatures, shutting them down for good. "But this was never finished," Alina said quietly, her mind working in overdrive. "If we can find this Void Reactor, we might have a chance of stopping them." A sense of urgency began to build inside her. They weren't just looking for answers anymore. They were searching for the key to saving what was left of the world, and the clock was ticking. With the Titans growing closer, every moment they wasted brought humanity one step closer to extinction. "Alina, we don't have much time," Dr. Grant said, his voice urgent. "We need to move now." She nodded. "I know. Let's go." As they hurried out of the room, Alina felt the weight of their mission press down on her. They had the information, but it was incomplete. The map to the Void Reactor was only a starting point. There was still so much they didn't know, so much they had to uncover. And the Titans were getting closer. The hunt for the Void Reactor. The cold wind howled through the desolate streets as Alina and Dr. Grant hurriedly made their way back to the underground facility's entrance. The weight of their new knowledge settled heavily on their shoulders. The Titans, creatures born from humanity's own failed ambitions, were out there, ravaging the planet, and they were more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. "Alina, we have to hurry," Dr. Grant urged, his voice tense. "If this Void Reactor can really neutralize the creatures, we need to find it before they find us." Alina's thoughts raced as she nodded in agreement. The map Dr. Grant had decrypted showed a general location of the Void Reactor, but it was hidden in an area that was now far too dangerous to reach on foot. The Titan's path of destruction was closing in, and every second counted. They quickly made their way to the nearest transport hub, but the devastation in the city had taken its toll on the transportation systems. Vehicles were either destroyed or immobilized, and the few that remained were filled with desperate survivors trying to flee the chaos. "Elena, we can't wait for transport," Dr. Grant said, his voice sharp with urgency. "We'll have to move on foot." Elena nodded, her gaze scanning the horizon. Fires raged in the distance, and the air was thick with smoke. The Titans were getting closer, and with them, the death toll continued to rise. Every building they passed seemed to tell the same story: ruin, destruction, and chaos. Yet, amid the horror, there was still a glimmer of hope: the void reactor. They didn't have much to go on. The map was incomplete, showing only a rough location. Elena could only hope that they would find more clues along the way. The clock was ticking, and there was no room for failure. As they crossed into the outskirts of the city, Elena couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and every movement seemed to echo in the empty streets. She glanced nervously at Dr. Grant, but his focus was on the path ahead. "I know they're out there," Elena said quietly, almost to herself. "The Titans. They're close." Dr. Grant didn't reply, but his silence spoke volumes. The tension between them was palpable. They both knew that if the Titans found them first, they wouldn't stand a chance. Their only hope lay in the void reactor, but the journey ahead was fraught with danger. They soon reached the edge of the city, and the landscape changed. The once bustling metropolis gave way to open fields and overgrown forests. The air here felt different, still, almost suffocating. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. "This is it," Dr. Grant said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. "According to the map, the reactor should be nearby. It's in a cave system up ahead." Elena's heart raced. A cave system. The very idea sent shivers down her spine. It was a place of isolation, a place where no one could hear them if something went wrong. And given what they were up against, things were likely to go wrong. But there was no turning back now. If the void reactor was their only chance to stop the Titans, they had no choice but to press on. As they entered the cave system, the atmosphere grew colder. The faint sound of dripping water echoed through the tunnels, and the darkness seemed to press in on them. Elena's flashlight beam cut through the blackness, revealing jagged rock formations and narrow passageways. "This doesn't feel right," Elena muttered, her voice uneasy. "This place gives me the creeps." Dr. Grant glanced at her but said nothing. Instead, he focused on the path ahead, his steps careful and deliberate. They couldn't afford to make mistakes now. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to thicken. It was as if the cave itself was resisting their presence. The walls closed in, and the silence became almost suffocating. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. A low rumble shook the cave, and the walls seemed to shift. Elena grabbed onto Dr. Grant's arm, her heart racing. "What was that?" she whispered. "I don't know," Dr. Grant replied, his voice tight with fear. "But we need to move faster." They quickened their pace, the fear of the unknown pushing them forward. The rumbling continued, growing louder with every passing second. Whatever was out there, it was closing in. The Titans were near, and they weren't going to wait for Elena and Dr. Grant to find the reactor. The tunnel ahead opened up into a vast underground chamber. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with an eerie light. In the center of the room stood a massive ancient machine, its purpose unclear, but its presence undeniable. This had to be the void reactor. Elena's breath caught in her throat. They had found it, but it wasn't just the reactor they had to worry about. The tremors from before were getting stronger, and something deep within the earth seemed to be waking up. "Elena, we don't have much time," Dr. Grant said urgently. "We need to activate the reactor before it's too late." But before they could even approach the machine, a deep growl reverberated through the chamber. Shadows shifted in the darkness, and Elena's flashlight flickered. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized the truth. They were not alone. The Titans had followed them. The final stand. The chamber was suffocatingly silent for a moment, save for the sound of Elena's rapid breathing. The flickering of their flashlights cast eerie shadows on the walls, distorting the already intimidating shapes of the strange symbols. But it wasn't the symbols or the machine that held their attention. It was the sound. The low, guttural growls of the Titans reverberated through the ground, sending vibrations that could be felt in their bones. Elena's heart raced as she glanced around, looking for any sign of movement. The shadows were deep, and the light from their torches barely touched the far corners of the massive cave. There, barely visible against the blackness, Elena thought she saw something massive shift. It was an indistinct shape at first, but as it moved closer, the outline became clearer. Large, hulking figures, their silhouettes distorted by the dark. "They're here," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing rumble. Dr. Grant turned toward her, his face etched with fear and determination. "We don't have much time. We have to activate the reactor now, or it's over." But as they rushed toward the ancient machine at the center of the room, the ground trembled again, much more violently this time. A deep, deafening roar echoed from the entrance of the cave, followed by the unmistakable sound of giant footsteps. The Titans were not just a few. They were coming in force. Elena's thoughts raced. She could feel the weight of the moment crushing down on her. The reactor was their only hope, but the Titans were closing in, each step a reminder that time was running out. If they failed, humanity would fall. "Elena, we have to hurry," Dr. Grant urged, already reaching for the control panel on the reactor. His hand shook as he ran his fingers over the unfamiliar controls. "I don't know how long it will take to activate this thing, but if we don't do it right." The rest of his sentence was cut off by another earth-shattering tremor. This time, it was followed by a loud crash. One of the Titans had just broken through a section of the cave wall, its massive claws tearing through stone like paper. The beast let out an unearthly scream, its hunger palpable in the way it moved toward them. Elena barely had time to react. "Dr. Grant, hurry." Dr. Grant was sweating now, his hands trembling even more as he fumbled with the controls. The machine hummed to life, lights flashing as a low mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. "Void reactor online. Initializing." A wave of relief washed over Elena, but it was short-lived. The Titans were only moments away. She turned, grabbing Dr. Grant's arm. "Let's move. We have to get to cover." But as she pulled him toward the far side of the cavern, a massive Titan lunged toward them, its teeth bared. Elena barely ducked in time, the beast's jaws snapping inches from her face. She pushed Dr. Grant behind a nearby rock pillar, her heart pounding in her chest. "Stay down," she hissed, her eyes darting toward the machine. It was working, but they were running out of time. The Titans were relentless, and each one that entered the chamber only made the odds of survival slimmer. The second Titan appeared at the entrance of the cavern, its massive body silhouetted against the entrance. As it entered, the other Titan joined it. Now they were surrounded. "We can't fight them," Dr. Grant whispered, his voice tense. "We have to trust the reactor." Elena nodded, barely able to hear him over the roar of the beasts and the chaos in the cavern. The void reactor was their only hope, but it needed time to reach full power, and the Titans weren't giving them any. One of the Titans bellowed, charging forward with terrifying speed. It reached the reactor and swiped its massive claw across the machine, sending sparks flying. The force of the impact shook the ground, and the reactor flickered for a moment, nearly shutting down. "No," Elena screamed. "It can't stop now." In that instant, something within her snapped. Adrenaline surged through her veins as she ran toward the machine, her eyes blazing with determination. The Titans were too close, and a reactor was their only hope. She couldn't let it fail. Not now. "Elena!" Dr. Grant shouted, but she didn't stop. She leaped toward the control panel, her fingers pressing the emergency override button. The machine whined in protest, but it came to life again. Sparks flew as power surged through it, and the machine's hum grew louder, more intense. The two titans charged at her, but Alina stood her ground, her eyes never leaving the reactor. The machine was starting to glow brighter now, its energy crackling in the air like a thunderstorm ready to break. Alina could feel the static charge in the air, the tension rising, and for a brief moment, she thought she might be struck by lightning. Then the air exploded. A pulse of energy shot out from the void reactor, washing over the cavern with a deafening roar. The shockwave sent the titans flying backward, their bodies thrown against the walls with crushing force. Their cries of pain echoed through the chamber as they scrambled to regain their footing. Alina fell to the ground, the force of the blast knocking her off balance. She gasped for breath, her ears ringing, but she could feel it. The change. The void reactor had done its job. The titans were no longer in control. Dr. Grant staggered to his feet, his eyes wide with awe. It worked. It actually worked. The titans, weakened and disoriented by the blast, were now retreating, their bodies dragging as they stumbled back toward the cave entrance. The immense energy of the reactor had done what they thought impossible. It had stopped the titans. But Alina knew this was not the end. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The last hope. The eerie calm that followed the destruction of the titans left Alina and Dr. Grant standing alone in the dimly lit cavern, the air still thick with the echoes of the battle. The ground was cracked and scarred, and debris lay scattered where the titans had been thrown by the reactor's pulse. But for all the silence, there was a new tension in the air. The titans had retreated, for now. But Alina knew this victory was temporary. They were not gone. They would be back. And next time, they might not be so easily repelled. "Is it over?" Dr. Grant asked, his voice hollow as he looked at the damaged reactor, which was still humming faintly in the background. Alina shook her head slowly. "No, it's not over. We've bought ourselves some time, but they're coming back, and we need to be ready." She turned her gaze back to the reactor, watching the dim glow that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the remaining energy. She knew what it meant. This was their last chance. If the titans returned before they could fully activate the machine, the entire Earth would be lost. "We need to get this reactor to full power. We can't afford another attack like that," Alina said, her tone sharp with urgency. Dr. Grant nodded, his eyes darkening with realization. "But it's unstable. If we push it any further, we risk making the same mistake we almost made earlier. We could lose everything." Alina didn't hesitate. "If we don't push it, we lose everything anyway. We're running out of time, and if we don't find a way to fully power it, the titans will find us. We have to finish what we started." Dr. Grant swallowed hard, but there was a fire in his eyes now, a resolve that matched her own. "All right, let's do it." With no more words, they moved quickly toward the reactor's central control panel, each step heavy with the weight of their mission. As they worked, the faint hum of the machine seemed to grow louder, a reminder of the immense power they were playing with. Alina focused all her attention on the reactor, her hands steady as she navigated through the complex console. She could hear Dr. Grant's voice behind her, guiding her through the final adjustments. There were no instructions for this, no safety protocols for a machine of this magnitude. Every decision they made from this point forward could be their last. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. Alina froze, her heart skipping a beat. The titans, they were back. "Dr. Grant," she began, but the words caught in her throat. Another tremor shook the cavern, this one even stronger than before. It was a signal. The titans were no longer retreating. They were charging again. Alina's pulse quickened, and she frantically pushed the final buttons, her hands moving faster than she ever thought possible. The machine was beginning to glow brighter now, the energy surging inside it. But with every second, the titans grew closer. The roar of the Titan's approach was unmistakable. Alina could hear their footsteps vibrating through the cavern floor. They were getting closer, too close for comfort. Almost there, Dr. Grant muttered, sweat dripping from his brow as he worked alongside her. Just a few more seconds. But it wasn't enough. The Titans were too close. A massive clawed hand reached into the cavern from the entrance, its shadow falling over the two of them. Alina whipped around, her heart racing. The largest Titan had returned, and it was directly in their path. "We need to move now," Alina shouted, grabbing Dr. Grant's arm and pulling him toward a narrow crevice in the rocks. They could barely fit, but it was their only chance to escape the Titan's wrath. As they squeezed into the crevice, Alina glanced back at the reactor. It was almost fully charged. The pulse of light was growing, and the machine was beginning to hum with power, sending shockwaves through the air. "We're not going to make it," Dr. Grant said, his voice filled with fear. But Alina refused to give up. "We don't have a choice." The Titan's roar echoed through the cavern as it advanced, its claws scraping against the rocks. Alina's heart was in her throat as she looked at the reactor, then back at the Titan. If they didn't act now, they would be crushed. Suddenly, the machine flared to life. A burst of energy shot out from the reactor, a brilliant beam of light that shot across the cavern, hitting the Titan with a force that sent it flying backward. It crashed against the far wall, its massive body crumpling in the wake of the energy blast. But Alina wasn't looking at the fallen Titan. Her gaze was locked on the reactor. The energy was still flowing, but it wasn't enough. "Get back," she shouted at Dr. Grant. "We have to finish this." Dr. Grant hesitated but then nodded, following her as she rushed back to the reactor's control panel. With one last, desperate push, Alina pressed the final sequence of buttons. The ground shook again, but this time, it was different. The machine hummed louder, the energy reaching its peak. And then, everything stopped. The world held its breath. The machine released a final pulse, and the Titan's growls stopped abruptly. The cavern shook once more, but this time, it was as if the very earth itself was rejecting them. Alina's heart raced in anticipation. The energy pulse from the reactor rippled outward, engulfing the cavern in a blinding light. The Titans froze, their massive forms beginning to disintegrate in the face of the immense power. And then, silence. Alina stood, panting, watching as the last of the Titans crumbled to dust. The reactor had done it. They had won. But as the light faded, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was just the beginning. The Titans were gone for now, but there were others out there. And the Earth would never be the same again. The mysterious signal. The Galactic Council had been ruling the stars for centuries. Their fleets traveled the galaxy, controlling planets, resources, and even entire star systems. They had seen countless species, some advanced, some primitive, but none had ever challenged their authority. That was until they received a strange signal from the far reaches of space. At first, no one paid it much attention. After all, they had received thousands of signals in the past, most of them from dying civilizations or malfunctioning technology. But this one was different. It wasn't just noise. It wasn't a random burst. It was structured, as if it was trying to tell them something. At the heart of the Galactic Council, inside a massive, sleek tower on the capital planet of Nexer, a meeting was called. The most powerful leaders of the galaxy gathered in a dimly lit room, the walls pulsing with light from the star outside. The signal was playing on a holographic screen, spinning and flashing in front of them. The council members stared at it, their eyes narrowed in confusion. "This is strange," said Vora, one of the top analysts. She adjusted her glasses, leaning closer to the screen. "This signal, it's not random. Someone or something is trying to communicate." The room grew silent. A few members looked at each other with uncertainty. They were not used to being caught off guard. For the Galactic Council, control was everything. But this was different. This was something they couldn't explain. "You're sure this isn't just some interference?" asked Drax, the commander of the military fleet. His tone was skeptical, but his eyes betrayed a hint of worry. He was the one who made sure that the Council's power was never questioned, and anything that could threaten that control made him uneasy. "I've checked the frequencies. It's not interference," Vora replied. "It's coming from a very specific location in the far reaches of the galaxy, near a system known as Earth." "Earth?" said Kor, the High Diplomat of the Council. "I've heard of it. It's a small, insignificant planet. Why would anything come from there?" "Exactly," said Drax, his voice tinged with disbelief. "What possible threat could come from a backwater planet like Earth?" The leaders exchanged glances, dismissing the thought of Earth being anything important. They'd heard of Earth's people before, primitive, unorganized, and lacking any significant military power. Why would such a species send a signal to the Galactic Council? What did they want? "Continue analyzing the signal," Vora instructed. "Let's see if there's anything else." The holographic signal blinked again, revealing a series of numbers, strange patterns, and then a message. It was a clear, direct transmission in their language, and it was chilling. The message read, "We are coming. Prepare yourselves." The room fell deathly silent. A chill ran down everyone's spine. For a moment, no one could speak. The council members exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to process what they had just read. Who would dare send a message like that? Kor whispered, "What is this?" "I don't know," said Vora, her voice trembling slightly. "But it's definitely from Earth. There's no mistake." Drax clenched his fists. "This is ridiculous. Earth has no means of space travel. There's no way they could be a threat." "Perhaps they found something new," Vora suggested. "Or they figured out something we don't know about yet." The room was filled with tension as the council tried to process what they were hearing. Could it be true? Could Earth, this tiny, insignificant planet, really be capable of sending such a message? How had they managed to reach the Galactic Council? And why? "What do we do now?" Kor asked, his voice rising. "Do we respond? Or do we ignore them?" "I suggest we respond carefully," said Vora. "We don't know what they're planning, but we can't afford to take any chances. We need to find out exactly what they want." "Agreed," Drax said. "I'll order a fleet to investigate the source of the signal. We'll show them that they've made a mistake in thinking they can challenge us." As the meeting continued, there was a growing sense of unease in the air. The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for so long without any serious challenge. But now, for the first time in centuries, they were being forced to confront the possibility that something, or someone, might be able to threaten their power. The signal had stirred something deep within them, a fear they had long forgotten. As the meeting ended, Drax stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the vastness of space. The stars seemed so far away, yet now they felt strangely close. The message from Earth echoed in his mind. "We are coming. Prepare yourselves." He didn't know what to expect, but one thing was clear. Earth wasn't going to be easy to dismiss anymore. The fleet's response. The Galactic Council was in turmoil after receiving the mysterious signal from Earth. Their once unchallenged power now seemed fragile, and the leaders struggled to understand what to do next. In a secret chamber deep within the Council's stronghold, the Council debated fiercely. "We can't ignore this," said Drax, the commander of the military fleet. He paced back and forth, his boots echoing in the cold, empty room. "We need to show them that they've made a huge mistake." Vora, the lead analyst, stood at a large holographic display, trying to decode the signal. "We have to be careful," she said, her voice cautious. "We don't know what Earth has discovered. They might have found something we're not aware of." "They're nothing but an insignificant species," Kor, the High Diplomat, interjected. "We've dealt with hundreds of worlds like Earth. Why should this be any different?" Drax's eyes narrowed. He didn't share Kor's confidence. The signal was clear. Earth was sending a message of defiance, and that was something the Galactic Council couldn't ignore. If Earth had the courage to challenge them, they needed to respond. "I'm not taking any chances," Drax declared. "We'll send a fleet to their planet, investigate their capabilities, and make it clear that they cannot threaten us." He turned to his officers who were standing in the shadows, waiting for orders. "Prepare the ships. We leave within the hour." As Drax gave the command, the tension in the room grew. Vora kept her eyes on the signal as it flickered on the display, but even she could sense something was off. It didn't make sense that Earth, a planet that was so far behind in technology, would challenge the might of the Galactic Council. There had to be something more to this. "I still don't understand," she muttered to herself. How could Earth have possibly discovered something so advanced? But the answer didn't matter now. Drax had made up his mind. The fleet would leave for Earth, and there would be no turning back. Within the next hour, the fleet was prepared. The ships were massive, sleek, and armed to the teeth. Their engines hummed with power as they prepared to enter the cold void of space. The Galactic Council had hundreds of ships at its disposal, and Drax's fleet was among the best. As the ships departed from the capital planet, the Council watched in silence. The fleet sped toward the coordinates of the mysterious signal, leaving a trail of light across the dark expanse of space. The tension was thick in the air. What would they find when they arrived? Would Earth's challenge turn out to be nothing more than a mistake? Or had they truly discovered something that could shake the foundation of the galaxy? Drax stood at the helm of his flagship, staring out at the stars. The journey to Earth would take days, and in that time, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them. The fleet traveled through the cold, silent reaches of space. As they neared the location of the signal, the tension among the crew grew. Every officer on board knew that this could be a pivotal moment in galactic history. Either Earth was a threat that needed to be crushed, or the Galactic Council had seriously underestimated their power. "What if Earth really has discovered something?" Vora asked as she joined Drax on the bridge. "What if they're not as weak as we think?" "We'll find out soon enough," Drax replied, his voice steady. "I'm not worried about Earth. We've faced stronger enemies. But if they have something we don't know about, we'll take care of it." The fleet continued its journey toward Earth. The days seemed to drag on, and the silence in space felt even heavier. But then, as they entered the final stretch toward the planet, something strange happened. The signal began to pulse again, stronger than before. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was as if it was calling to them, guiding them in. "Captain," Vora said, her voice tense, "the signal is getting stronger. It's coming from the surface of Earth." Drax's eyes narrowed. "Prepare for immediate communication. We'll see if we can get an answer from them before we make contact." As the fleet neared Earth, the tension grew unbearable. The ships hovered just outside Earth's atmosphere, waiting for something, anything, that would explain this mysterious signal. And then, finally, the message came through. "Welcome, Galactic Council. We've been expecting you." The voice was calm, almost casual. It sent chills down Drax's spine. How could Earth be so confident? How could they possibly know the fleet was coming? "I don't like this," Drax muttered, his hand tightening on the controls. "We've been underestimating them." The fleet was now just moments away from Earth. What they would find, no one could say. But the unknowns of this encounter sent a ripple of unease through everyone on board. In that moment, Drax realized that this mission might not go as he expected. Earth was no longer the insignificant backwater planet he had once thought. There was something far more dangerous brewing on its surface, and they were about to find out what. The first encounter. The galactic fleet hovered just above Earth's atmosphere, its ships massive and intimidating. Drax stood at the helm of his flagship, eyes focused on the screen in front of him. The message from Earth had sent a wave of uncertainty through the crew. But they were ready. They had no choice but to proceed with their mission. "Captain, the human warships have been detected," Vora reported, her voice steady but tinged with tension. "They're moving towards us." Drax's heart skipped a beat. Earth was no longer standing idly by. They were preparing for battle. The human ships were far smaller, less advanced in technology, but they were coming. The Council's fleet, on the other hand, was a formidable force, armed with the best weapons and shields the galaxy had to offer. "Prepare to engage," Drax ordered, his voice cold. He knew they could crush the human ships easily, but the situation had grown more complicated. Earth had called them out, and now they would find out if Earth's warriors were as fearless as their words suggested. As the human ships closed in, the tension was unbearable. The distance between the two fleets began to shrink, but Drax could see that the humans weren't retreating. They weren't even slowing down. In fact, they were speeding up, as if they were welcoming the challenge. The communications officer's voice broke through the silence. "Captain, the human fleet is broadcasting a message." "Put it on screen," Drax ordered. The image flickered, and a human officer appeared. His face was calm, almost amused. His uniform was simple, unadorned, and he appeared to be alone, standing in front of a basic control panel. "This is Captain Tyler of Earth's fleet," the human officer said. His voice was clear, and his eyes held a certain confidence. "We are here to defend our planet. If you're looking for a fight, you've found it." Drax's eyes narrowed. "Defend? You're outmatched. We've come to teach you a lesson in humility." Captain Tyler's lips curled into a smile. "We'll see about that, won't we?" The transmission ended, and Drax felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the human officer's calm demeanor unsettled him. This wasn't the response he expected from a species that was supposed to be weak and primitive. They were standing firm, not backing down. "Activate the weapons," Drax ordered. "Prepare to fire." The fleet's massive guns powered up, and the enormous warships prepared for combat. The human ships were closing in quickly. Drax had no doubt that this battle would be over in a matter of minutes, with the Galactic Council emerging victorious. But as the two fleets finally faced each other, something unexpected happened. The human ships, which had seemed so small and weak, suddenly deployed a series of advanced energy shields. The shields shimmered in the light, almost as if they were alive, and the ships seemed to absorb the energy from the surrounding space. It was unlike anything the Galactic fleet had ever seen before. "What is this?" Vora gasped, her fingers flying across the control panel. "Their shields are deflecting our energy blasts. Our weapons are ineffective." Drax's mind raced. This wasn't possible. Earth had no right to possess technology of this caliber. How were they able to create such powerful shields? The Galactic Council had spent centuries perfecting their weapons, and now a relatively unknown species was showing them up. "Switch to manual targeting," Drax commanded. "We need to break through their shields." The two fleets circled each other, the tension building with every passing second. Drax was no longer certain of the outcome of this battle. The humans were holding their ground, and their ships were far more resilient than he had expected. "Captain," Vora said, her voice urgent, "their ships are charging up some kind of energy weapon." "What?" Drax snapped. "Get a reading on that weapon. What kind of power are they using?" "It's unlike anything we've seen before," Vora replied, her voice filled with disbelief. "It's almost as if they've harnessed the energy of a star itself." Drax's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a challenge. It was a warning. Earth wasn't playing around. They were serious, and they had the power to back up their claims. The human fleet fired first, and the blast that hit Drax's ship was like nothing he had ever felt before. The ship rocked violently, and the shields flickered. For a moment, Drax thought the ship might be torn apart. "Return fire," Drax shouted. His hands gripped the controls tightly, his mind racing. He couldn't let this be the end. The Galactic Council couldn't be defeated by a bunch of humans. It was unthinkable. But as the battle raged on, Drax realized that the tables were turning. The human fleet wasn't backing down, and they were fighting harder than any enemy he had ever faced. The Galactic fleet's weapons seemed powerless against the energy shields, and Drax knew that if they didn't adapt quickly, they might lose. Suddenly, another blast from the human fleet hit, this time striking the vital section of Drax's flagship. The ship groaned under the pressure, and alarms blared across the bridge. "Captain, we've lost power to the main engines," Vora exclaimed. "We're drifting." Drax's mind raced. They couldn't afford to lose the flagship. They had to find a way to outsmart the humans, but it was becoming clearer with each passing second that Earth had something the Galactic Council didn't. In that moment, Drax knew the truth. Earth was no longer the underdog. They were a serious threat, and the Galactic Council had underestimated them. The turning point. The battle between Earth's fleet and the Galactic Council's armada had escalated quickly. Drax, captain of the flagship Exemplar, felt a growing unease in his chest. His ship had sustained damage, and the human warships, despite their size, were not backing down. Earth's fleet had more power, more resolve, and they were proving it with every energy blast that struck the galactic ships. "Status report," Drax barked, his voice sharper than he intended. Vora, his chief officer, quickly scanned the data on her screen. "Captain, we've sustained significant damage. Several of our outer hulls have been breached. Shields are down to 30%, and we can't regenerate energy fast enough to retaliate." Drax clenched his fists. This was not how the battle was supposed to go. The Galactic Council had spent centuries building up its fleet, and now a species they considered primitive was overwhelming them. The human ships, though fewer in number, were relentlessly advancing. Their energy weapons were unlike anything the Council had ever seen. Drax had always been confident in his fleet's superiority, but now he was forced to admit the unthinkable. The humans were a serious threat. As the human warships continued their assault, Drax's flagship was hit once again. This time, the shockwave rattled the entire ship, throwing Drax off balance. He grasped the console tightly to steady himself. "Captain," Vora exclaimed, panic creeping into her voice. "We've lost our outer defenses. The Exemplar is vulnerable." Drax's mind raced. They had no time to waste. His flagship was losing power fast, and the fleet was starting to retreat, knowing full well that they couldn't win this fight. "What's happening?" Drax asked, his voice barely a whisper. The human fleet had switched tactics. They weren't firing as often, but they were positioning themselves in ways that forced the Galactic fleet to retreat further and further into the depths of space. The Exemplar drifted, its engines failing. The sight of the enemy ships circling them with methodical precision only added to the growing fear. "Retreat," Drax shouted, his pride wounded, but he knew it was the only option. His voice cracked as he gave the order. "Signal the fleet to fall back. We can't risk any more damage. We'll regroup and strike again." But it was too late. The human fleet was already closing in. With precision that even the Galactic fleet couldn't match, the human ships moved into position and fired one final blast that crippled the Exemplar. As the flagship was engulfed in a blinding flash of light, Drax could only watch helplessly as his ship's systems failed completely. For the first time, he felt fear. He, who had led countless battles, was now on the edge of defeat. The screen in front of him flickered, and for a brief moment, he saw Captain Tyler's face again. The human smile was now replaced by a look of calm satisfaction. "This is what happens when you underestimate humanity," Captain Tyler's voice echoed through the transmission. "Next time, remember that Earth doesn't back down." Drax's eyes widened. The words echoed in his mind long after the transmission ended. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The Galactic fleet, one of the most powerful forces in the universe, had been forced into retreat by a group of humans. As the Exemplar was crippled, the remaining ships of the Galactic fleet began to retreat into space. The human ships didn't pursue them. Instead, they simply watched. They didn't need to chase. The message had already been sent. Drax's mind raced. How could Earth, a planet they had once viewed as insignificant, become such a powerful force in such a short amount of time. The Galactic fleet was retreating, but Drax knew this defeat would have far-reaching consequences. Earth had just changed the balance of power in the galaxy. He had no doubt that the Council would respond, but for now, it was clear. Humanity had shown they could hold their ground. As the Exemplar limped away, Drax couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. They had underestimated Earth, and now they had to face the consequences. His fleet had failed. Earth had delivered a blow that none of them could have predicted. The Council's wrath. The Galactic Council's headquarters, a massive fortress orbiting a distant star, was silent. A cold atmosphere hung in the council chambers as the most powerful beings in the galaxy convened. The great leaders, who once ruled with unquestioned authority, now sat in tense silence. The holographic image of the Exemplar, the flagship of the Galactic fleet, flickered on the main screen. It was a pitiful sight. The ship was broken, a symbol of their first defeat at the hands of humanity. Drax stood before the council, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid with frustration. His fleet had been shattered, retreating in defeat from the humans' unexpected and brutal response. The council was furious, their voices echoing in the darkened chamber. "You were defeated by them," one of the council members, a towering figure with a face like stone, growled. "By humans. How is this possible?" Drax bowed his head, refusing to meet their eyes. He had no answers, only a haunting feeling of dread. He had been certain the Galactic fleet was invincible, but humanity had proven him wrong in ways he hadn't imagined possible. "Forgive me, Council," Drax said, his voice strained. "The humans fought with a strategy we were not prepared for. Their ships, though smaller, had advanced technology and weapons we've never encountered. They outmaneuvered us, destroyed our fleet, and even forced us into retreat. We underestimated them." The council members exchanged harsh looks. A quiet hum of dissatisfaction filled the room. A moment later, a deep voice spoke, cutting through the tension. "You failed us, Drax. The consequences of your failure are grave." The voice came from the head of the council, a being of immense power and wisdom, known only as Zoreth. His figure was an enormous hologram that loomed over the room. "You were tasked with eliminating Earth as a threat, and now they've shown us that we are not untouchable. Our enemies have grown bolder." Drax felt the weight of the words bearing down on him. The council was angry, but Zoreth's words held a deeper meaning. Earth was no longer an insignificant planet. In their victory, humanity had shown that they could challenge the greatest empire in the galaxy. "How do you propose we respond to this?" Another council member, Lyra, asked, her voice filled with cold fury. "We can't just let them get away with this." Drax swallowed hard. He had no answer for them. His mind was clouded with the memory of Captain Tyler's calm, victorious face after the battle. The humans weren't afraid. That, more than anything, terrified him. Their fearlessness wasn't something the council could control. Drax had always been sure of their superior strength, but now Earth's resolve was crystal clear, and that terrified him more than anything else. "We must strike back," Zoreth declared, his voice a booming command. "The humans have shaken us, and they will pay for their insolence. Drax, your failure is unforgivable, but we will not let this stand. Prepare the fleet. We will invade Earth and wipe them from existence." The council chamber erupted into chaos as members shouted in agreement. Drax looked around, feeling like an outsider. This wasn't the plan he had hoped for. He had always been part of the council's grand designs, ruthless, calculated. But now, all he could see was rage and vengeance clouding their judgment. Zoreth's eyes narrowed as he locked onto Drax. "You will lead the invasion. You have no choice. Show us that you are not completely incompetent." Drax stiffened. He had no choice but to obey. He had failed them once, and now his honor, and his life, was at stake. But something deep inside him stirred. He had seen firsthand the might of humanity. Earth's warships had proven themselves against the greatest power in the galaxy, and now Drax was tasked with crushing them. He didn't feel the same confidence he once had. How could he? "Prepare yourself, Drax." Zorath's voice boomed again, pulling him from his thoughts. "Your future depends on this. The battle begins." The fleet was ready. Thousands of ships, each one a titan of power, lay in wait in the dark expanse of space. Drax stood on the bridge of his command ship, his eyes fixed on the swirling mass of stars before him. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. His mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, fear, anger, and doubt. This wasn't the same battle he had prepared for. The humans had shown they were capable of more than anyone had ever imagined. Could they do it again? The Council had made it clear. There was no room for failure now. If Drax failed to crush Earth, the consequences would be unthinkable. Yet, as he stared at the view outside the bridge windows, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this time might be different. "We are ready to launch, Commander," came a voice from behind him. It was Lieutenant Arlen, his trusted second-in-command. The young officer's face was grim, his hands clasped behind his back as he stood at attention. Drax didn't answer immediately. His mind was still racing. But then, with a deep breath, he nodded. "Prepare the fleet for battle," he commanded, his voice firm, but a twinge of uncertainty lingered in his chest. The vast array of ships slowly began to move into position. The massive warships, their weapons primed and ready, formed a colossal formation. They were a force of unimaginable power. No one in the galaxy had dared challenge them before. Across the stars, in the depths of Earth's space, the humans watched. Their warships were far smaller than the behemoths of the Galactic fleet, yet they were just as deadly. They had learned from the first encounter. They had adapted. And now, they waited. The time had come for the final confrontation. On the bridge of the Valor, Earth's flagship, Captain Tyler stood with arms crossed, staring at the holographic display. His face was calm, but there was an undeniable fire in his eyes. The Galactic Empire had underestimated humanity. Now they would pay for that mistake. "We're ready, Captain," Lieutenant Jenna said, her voice steady. Tyler nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "They may have the numbers, but we have something they'll never understand. Let's show them." He turned toward the communications officer. "Send the signal. Let's make sure the galaxy knows Earth's response." The officer nodded and sent out a message to all human ships, setting the tone for the battle that was about to unfold. As the message went out, Tyler spoke once more. "This is it. We're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for every planet the Empire has ever threatened. Let's make sure they regret ever coming here." On the edge of the human fleet, the Excalibur, one of Earth's most advanced ships, launched into the battle. The fleet, made up of ships from all over the world, surged forward, their weapons charged and their crews ready. The calm before the storm had passed, and now the storm was coming. Back on Drax's flagship, the first signs of the human fleet appeared on his scanners. They were approaching fast, their formations tight and disciplined. Drax's heart rate quickened. The humans weren't running. They weren't afraid. They were coming for him. "Get ready for combat," Drax shouted. "Fire at will." The first volley of weapons was fired from the galactic ships, enormous energy blasts lighting up the void of space. But the humans were ready. Their warships darted and weaved, avoiding the incoming fire with impossible precision. Then, without warning, the human ships fired back. The space around Drax's fleet erupted in explosions as the human warships unleashed their devastating firepower. Drax's ship rocked as the Exemplar took a direct hit. His crew scrambled to respond, but the damage was severe. Systems were failing, and the bridge shook violently under the pressure. "Return fire," Drax barked, his voice tight. "Focus all firepower on the Valor." The Valor, the flagship of Earth's fleet, was the primary target. Its massive weapons fired back, each shot aimed with deadly accuracy. Drax's ships struggled to keep up with the relentless assault. But just as the battle seemed to tip in favor of the humans, Drax's fleet began to regroup. Their superior numbers were now being put to work, surrounding Earth's warships in a web of fire. It was a strategy Drax had trained for, the kind of overwhelming force that had always crushed enemies before. Yet, despite the mounting pressure, the humans didn't falter. Their ships fought with a determination Drax had never seen before. They were relentless, moving with a precision that could only be described as expert. And then something unexpected happened. As the battle raged, a single human ship, the Excalibur, launched itself straight toward Drax's flagship. It was a bold move, one that defied the usual strategies, and it took Drax completely by surprise. "Prepare for impact," Drax yelled, but it was too late. The Excalibur rammed into the Exemplar, its hull cracking against the larger ship with terrifying force. Drax could only watch as his flagship trembled, its systems faltering under the pressure. The collision had done more damage than he could have anticipated. Suddenly, the message was clear. The humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for revenge. And this was just the beginning. The turning point. The battle had reached its boiling point. The void of space, once silent and vast, now echoed with the sounds of war. Sparks flew through the airless expanse as massive energy blasts collided with the hulls of ships, sending shockwaves rippling through the surrounding fleet. The Excalibur's impact with Drax's flagship, the Exemplar, had sent shockwaves across both fleets, and the momentum of the battle was shifting. Drax, his mind racing, stood at the center of the bridge. His face was pale, his hands shaking from the impact. His fleet, the mightiest the galaxy had ever known, was in disarray. Human ingenuity, courage, and sheer willpower were proving to be a force unlike anything he had ever encountered. The Exemplar had taken a direct hit to its command center, and critical systems were failing. The once unshakable Galactic fleet was now scrambling, struggling to respond to the unexpected tactics of their enemies. "Status report," Drax shouted over the chaos. "We're losing power, Commander. Shields are failing across multiple sectors." Lieutenant Arlen reported, his voice filled with fear. "The Excalibur, it's coming again." Drax's eyes widened. His fleet was struggling to recover, and now the Excalibur was bearing down on them once more, moving like a missile through the void. The human ship's captain was no longer just fighting to defend, they were fighting to annihilate. The Excalibur had proven itself as a weapon of destruction, and its captain, Captain Tyler, was a force to be reckoned with. "Prepare to repel them," Drax ordered, his voice tight with urgency, but there was little hope left in his tone. The battle was no longer in his hands. Back on the Valor, Captain Tyler stood, watching the battle unfold through the panoramic view screen. The Galactic fleet had underestimated humanity's resolve, but now they were starting to understand. Every shot fired, every move made, was calculated to prove a point. The humans were no longer afraid. "Target the weak points in their formation," Tyler commanded. "We've shaken them. Now let's break them." His fleet followed his lead, coordinating their fire to focus on the vulnerable spots in the Galactic ships. The Exemplar, Drax's flagship, was already reeling, and the humans weren't going to give it a chance to recover. Tyler's warship, the Valor, was the spearhead, but every human ship fought with the same relentless energy. "Captain, their shields are faltering," Lieutenant Jenna said, eyes locked on the console. "We've got them on the ropes." Tyler clenched his fists. This was it, the turning point. The Galactic fleet, once so confident in their power, was starting to crumble. Earth had finally made its mark. "Bring the Excalibur around," Tyler ordered. "We're going in for the kill." The human ship, fast and deadly, maneuvered through the battlefield with precision. As it closed in on the Exemplar, Tyler could see the damage the collision had caused. Sparks flickered from the flagship's outer hull, and smoke billowed from the broken sections. It was clear that Drax's pride and joy had been dealt a mortal blow. But the Galactic commander wasn't giving up yet. Drax's voice echoed across the comms as his ship's remaining weapons fired with a final desperate effort. "Engage all firepower," Drax screamed. "Destroy them." The Exemplar unleashed a barrage of fire, but it was too little, too late. The human fleet was too coordinated, too well prepared. Their ships had already adapted, moving with near-perfect precision to avoid the incoming blasts. The Galactic fleet was failing, and Drax could see it. The hope was draining from his crew's faces. But Drax wasn't ready to surrender. He had fought too long for the Empire's glory. His pride and arrogance had clouded his judgment, but he couldn't let it end like this. He couldn't let Earth's audacity be the final word. "We will not fall," Drax shouted, his voice crackling through the comms. "I will not let Earth defeat us." But no one was listening anymore. The Excalibur and the Valor closed in. The decisive moment had arrived. Captain Tyler, standing at the helm of the Valor, narrowed his eyes. The Galactic fleet was broken. There was no more resistance left. His ship's weapons charged one final time, each one focused on the heart of the Exemplar. With a single command, the Valor fired, sending a final blinding blast toward the Galactic flagship. The Exemplar erupted in a massive explosion, its once proud hull disintegrating in the face of the human might. Drax, along with the last of his fleet, was finished. The galaxy would never be the same again.